Good morning, third graders. Today is Thursday, April 23rd, 2020. We are finishing up Unit 5, Week 1. Today we have 3 pages we'll be working on, page 465, 466, and 467. Go ahead and get your student interactive ready, or make sure you're looking at mine. We are going to begin, like I said, on page 465. Today we'll be talking about poetry and the difference between poetry and prose. And what is prose? Poetry is a creative way to express oneself in writing. The rules for poetry are different from prose, or a written language in its ordinary form. So when you read an informational text or when you read your favorite novel, that's prose. Poetry is completely different. Of course, still writing and it's still written language, but there are some very identifiable differences between the two. So we're going to go ahead and look at each of these questions on the left-hand side in this first column of the chart. Then we're going to go ahead and compare and contrast poetry and prose. What is the structure? Well, poems may be unstructured or grouped into stanzas. So I always say that poetry, when you see those different groups of writing in poetry, I call them poem paragraphs. They're not really paragraphs, but when you open up a novel, you see that oftentimes your text is separated into paragraphs, right? Groups of sentences. Well, in poetry, the poet, the author, might choose to separate their text into different groups as well. They're not paragraphs, but I call stanzas poem paragraphs, just to kind of remember what it is. Prose, those are sentences and paragraphs, just like you would see in your novel. Well, what does it say? Poetry tells a story or expresses feelings or ideas. Prose usually focuses on a story. Does it use many words? In poetry, it often communicates meaning with few words. You can say a lot with just a little. In prose, it often includes descriptions and complete sentences. Get that, you guys. When you write a poem, do you even need a period? You don't. You don't need punctuation at all if that's the way you want to write your poem. Does it use sound devices such as rhyme and rhythm? Poetry, what do you guys think? Definitely. Words at the end of lines may or may not rhyme. Poems also may use other sound devices such as repetition or rhythm. We're going to talk more about what that is in just a little bit. Prose. Sound devices such as rhyme are rarely used. So most of the time when you're reading a text and it's written in the form of prose, those sound devices are not used. All right, you guys, this is where it gets fun. The My Turn. It says use a poem you have read to answer the questions. I'm going to go ahead and show you a website where there are plenty of poems for you to look through, okay? So make sure you're still looking at my screen. And I want you guys to go to this website. It's called poetryforkids.com. And notice that the 4 is the digit 4. When you get to poetryforkids.com, you're going to go ahead and click this or hover your mouse over it where it says poems. And I like the funny poems. We're going to use a specific poem that I chose and read ahead of time as an example. And I'm just going to click the first one. Basketball is lots of fun. Go ahead and click that, or at least follow along on my screen. Basketball is lots of fun. Basketball is lots of fun. It's my favorite sport, but I'm so bad that when I play, they throw me off the court. Now hockey is my favorite sport. The trouble is, I stink. So every time I hit the ice, they throw me off the rink. Now soccer is the game I like. There's just one little hitch. I kick and run too slow, and so they throw me off the pitch. At last I found some sports that I can play and not get thrown. Now I play soccer, basketball, and hockey on my phone. Okay, now that we've read the poem, we're going to go back to our student interactive and answer these questions. How many lines and stanzas are in the poem? I'm not going to answer it for you, but I'm going to show you how to find the answer. If I go back to the poem, this group of lines is considered a stanza. So I see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 stanzas. I know I said I wouldn't answer it for you, but I did. Now, in each of these stanzas, I see 4 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I know you guys can do this third grade math. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 stanzas. There are 4 lines in each, 4 times 4. If you know what 4 times 4 is, go ahead and write that down. That's how many lines there are. So we know there are 4 stanzas in this poem. Write down the number of lines there are. What is the poet saying? What is this poet trying to tell you? I know that this poet really wanted to play sports, but every time the author was playing a sport, they were kicked off. How did this poem end, though? You're going to want to include that in what is the poet saying. Write a phrase that expresses meaning with few words. Let's go back and see. Maybe I now play soccer, basketball, and hockey on my phone. That tells me that the author isn't actually playing all of those sports that he or she thought was fun, the favorite sport, the game they like, right? This person is now playing on their phone, but they tell me that with very few words. If the poem rhymes, write a pair of rhyming words. Write a word that imitates a natural sound if there is one. Let's go back and see. I don't see any natural sounds, but I do see a lot of rhyming words. For example, in the first stanza, I see fun. And is there a word that rhymes with fun? No. Oftentimes the first line and the third line have rhyming words like fun and play. So if the first line and the third line don't rhyme in each stanza, what are the two lines that do rhyme? I see sport, that's in line 2, and court. In the next stanza, I see in the second line of this stanza stink, and in the fourth line, ring. Go ahead and find the rest of the rhyming words and choose 2 that you want to write down in your student interactive. Okay, we're going to move on to the next page. We're moving on to page 466. Well, what in the world does poetry sound like? We're going to talk about some examples, and then we're going to give an explanation. These poem elements affect the way the poem sounds. It oftentimes affects the way it's read out loud or the way you read it to yourself in your head. So for example, the earth starts to quake, and I can feel the ground shake. Quake and shake are rhyming words. They have the same end sound. Quake and shake. You hear that ache in both of them. Let's look at this example. Tall mountains wobble, large buildings topple. These lines rhyme and have a rhythm or beat. It says to tap a pencil as you read aloud. What rhythm do you hear? Here's my example. Tall mountains wobble, large buildings topple. Do you guys hear the same rhythm or do you hear a different one? Let's look at our next example. The rocks made a loud noise as they fell. Crash, smash. With onomatopoeia, words sound like their meaning. Can you guys say that word? Onomatopoeia. So if I say bang or kaboom, those words are onomatopoeia, just like crash and smash. It's the word that's actually the meaning of their sound. Our last example is alliteration. Look at these N's that are in blue. Nearby neighbors are nice to those in need. Alliteration is the repetition of beginning sounds in nearby words. So almost every word in this sentence begins with the letter N and has that sound that the N makes. Nearby neighbors are nice to those in need. So your job is to choose one or more of the poems that you enjoy reading and complete the chart using examples from these poems. So I know our student interactive doesn't come with poems, but again, I want you to go to this Poetry for Kids website. I'll take you back to the beginning, poetryforkids.com with the number 4. And you can choose classic poems, nursery rhymes. You could choose a poem by subject, or maybe you want to see what the 3rd grade poems are. Go ahead and explore. You're welcome to use any other poems. You might have a book of poems at your house. That's fine with me as well. We have one more page we're working on today. And this is what does poetry look like? The way a poem looks can be important to its mood and meaning. Most poems use line breaks, okay? So what that means is a line tells you when to pause or stop. Lines may be longer or shorter. They can be different lengths. Like we talked about before, sometimes in poetry, these lines have punctuation. Sometimes they don't. You might see periods or exclamation points or question marks. You may not. Longer poems are often divided into those stanzas, those poem paragraphs, like I like to call them, which is a group of lines. So, for example, you can see in this box here, it says, the sink drips, one drop at a time. Notice how I paused at the end of each of those lines? That was because that's where the line broke. Some poems are shapes. Words may twist and turn, or their size and style may vary. The shape often connects to the poem's meaning. So let's take a look at this poem. It says, this poem circles round and then falls to the ground. How does this poem's shape add to the meaning? Do you notice that shape? Is it actually circling round and falling to the ground? Number 2, how could you rewrite the shaped poem with line breaks? So what that means is you're going to take this poem that's circling round and then falling to the ground, and just like the poem that's in this blue box up here, rewrite it. You could write this poem circles round and then falls to the ground. You could write it in 2 lines. This poem circles round and then falls to the ground. It's up to you, but make sure you go ahead and break that poem into at least 2 lines. Okay, you guys. Next week, we're going to do even more work with poetry. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Before we stop talking together today, I want to give you a reminder. Tomorrow, you need to get on MyView. You need to take your weekly progress check. It's Unit 5, Week 1. Make sure to get on MyView tomorrow and take your weekly progress check. You also need to be working on your studies weekly, Week 24. The topic is Law and Order. As always, please reach out to me if you need any help, and I will see you tomorrow in our Friday meeting.